Steve. Steve is the president of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Singapore. He's a vice president of UPS in public affairs and has been there for many years, based in Singapore since 2003, is
Yes.
that right? And Steve also worked in the Clinton administration in the 90s in the transportation department. So he's certainly very knowledgeable about Asia and also very knowledgeable about the U.S. We're really pleased to have you here to kick off a dialogue about Asia, but also to talk about the recent developments in the United States.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. Steve, over the last few days, I've probably gotten 100 emails and lots of phone calls from all around the world. Some friends in Switzerland saying, "Congratulations! This is what we expected from the United States. This is important for the world." What are you seeing? What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, in part, it is just such a historic event, and I've been getting the same messages. One of the things, though, that's kind of striking to me is that how high the expectations are. Exactly. And you know, this is what President-elect Obama's second day is president-elect, and all the stories now are what does this mean for Asia? What does this mean for the economy? How are all the changes going to happen? And you know, the transition teams are just still being set up in Washington. So I think we have to give it a little bit of time to see how this is going to play out politically, economically. There's a lot of work that needs to get done on how the agenda is going to set, and I'd like to, you know, look forward to talking about that today. But I think for a few couple days, I mean, this just shows the American system, the American process, how it works, and it's astounding that you know, 5 years ago I had a friend call me up and say, "I need you to write a check. There's a state senator from Illinois I'm supporting for Senate." And I said, "I'd never heard of this person. But for you, if you like him, okay, I'll give a campaign donation." And to think that somebody like me who's in politics and government had never heard of, 5 years later he's our president, it says something about the American system.
Right. Well, you know, you talk about expectations, and the expectations in the United States for XYZ needs to be fixed. The expectations around the world for what President Obama can do for the U.S. standing in the world, it seems like he's going to have to do some major expectations management.
It is, and it's also, I mean, I think we need to watch what happens in Asia, which is going to dictate part of what happens in Washington. There's all of this talk, what's going to happen in Washington, how is Washington going to react, what is Washington going to do? And part of how Washington reacts is, well, what is happening in Asia today? There's all of this talk about trade and how trade came up in the campaign, and are we going to shift our trade policy from the current administration to the incoming administration? And I think I would say there's three things to really watch on that. And the first to keep in mind is that what happens in campaigns isn't necessarily what happens in governance. You know, in 1968, while I didn't watch the political commercials back then, I'm fairly confident that Richard Nixon wasn't running ads saying by the end of his first term he was going to fly to Beijing, sit down with Chairman Mao, and open up China. But that's what happened. So he didn't run on that platform, but how he governed was different because circumstances change, and when you get into the White House, you look at things differently. The second thing to understand about the U.S. is going back certainly for the last 4 terms. So beginning with the Clinton administration in '93, that started from trade with the agreement to sign and ratify NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And that history of trade and globalization continued through the end of President Clinton's second term when the U.S. negotiated China's WTO Ascension Agreement, and then that was ratified by our Senate. And of course, President Bush has had a very pro-trade agenda and many pro-trade accomplishments. So for the last 16 years, and in fact, certainly before then, but for the last 16 Democratic Republican administrations, we have had a very pro-trade, pro-globalization. Is that all of a sudden going to change? And then the third piece I'd bring up, and to talk about what's happening in Asia, and there's a story about President Franklin Roosevelt, and he was met by a group of businessmen who were advocating a position that they wanted the White House to take back in the 1930s. And the businessmen laid out their position to Franklin Roosevelt, and FDR said to them, "I agree with you. Now you got to go out, generate some heat, and make me do it. That's the way the U.S. system works. And that's the role of the business community in the U.S. is to educate the policymakers, educate the public about the value of trade, the value of globalization. We can do that in the U.S., but that also has to happen in Asia. And my question back really to this audience and to you, Frank, is what is Asia going to do? In my field of logistics right now, there is legislation and regulation pending in China, in India, in Thailand that would limit U.S. or limit any foreign direct investment, and of course U.S. foreign direct investment in those countries. So if we're faced as the foreign business community here with trade barriers being newly erected, it's very hard for us to advocate back in Washington that those trade barriers shouldn't be erected in the U.S. So how this develops isn't just going to be the Obama administration and who he names and how the new Congress, which is greater Democratic majority than it had before, what they're going to do, but it's what can the business community do. And the business community can only do what the governments in Asia enable us to do as well.
It seems on trade that during the whole process of the election, which is interminable as we all know, NAFTA was really the big saber-rattling issue. And I think that got everyone scared. You know, Obama's perceived and spoken view on NAFTA of tightening and maybe repealing, et cetera, got everybody scared around the world in terms of the U.S. becoming protectionist. Now, I agree with you that rhetoric in campaigns doesn't play out, but doesn't the first move have to be made by the U.S. to say, look, here's what we're going to do vis-a-vis trade in general, and then let's work bilaterally with our counterparties around the world, particularly in Asia?
Well, and again, you know, the Obama administration isn't taking office for another few months. And we have to see what happens in the next few months in Asia. All of this, there's a lot of legislation pending here. And so I don't know if it's let's see, Washington takes the first move. I mean, I think it's a global trade community. And we really need to see what happens to figure out how this is going to take part. As AmCham, I mean, one of the things that we're clearly working on, both as AmCham Singapore and as all of the American chambers, is working on papers we want to give to the incoming administration and tell them the benefits of trade, tell them how much FDI we have in Singapore, how much FDI we have in the region. There's more exports from U.S. businesses to ASEAN than there is to either the UK or Germany. I mean, and so people don't know that back home, and that's part of what we need to do in our education process.
Steve, you've seen some transitions from one president to another. Very interesting times, very frenetic. Talk about how it works and talk a little bit about what people in Asia should be looking for in terms of key appointments and what it might mean.
Well, I think just to take it maybe one step back and then get there is to look at what happened in the election. In the U.S., everybody had said, well, we've moved into this very red state, blue state country. And a red state is a Republican state because when the map goes up on election night, the TV networks color it red if the Republicans win, and they color it blue if the Democrats win. And from 2000 to 2004, we had a very static map. Only 3 states changed in those elections. One state went from blue to red, and 2 went from red to blue, and 1 went from blue to red from 2000 and 2004. In 2008, 9 red states went to blue. And now people are saying maybe we don't have such a static map. Maybe we aren't such a red state, blue state. Maybe we are more of a purple country. And that would be, of course, a good thing in terms of governance. So one of the things to kind of watch, is that really going to happen? The second thing is what can the Democrats do now that they have the House and the Senate with very big majorities, as well as the White House. We have a system where we elect our president not by popular vote, but it's by popular vote, then through an electoral college, and then And then the Electoral College electors vote on the president. So I actually don't vote for the president when I vote for somebody who will then vote for the president for me.
But at least this president won the popular vote too.
Well, yeah, he won the popular vote too, but he won it in where our system works well, when it works, when the Electoral College works. 2000, maybe it didn't work as well. 2008, you know, Barack Obama beat John McCain by 5 points. It was about 52 to 47. But in the Electoral College, he had a landslide. He won, well, they're still counting a few states, but essentially a 66 to 33% margin. And so when you come in with that, you know, 2/3 to 1/3, it gives more of a mandate to the incoming president that really hadn't occurred since Bill Clinton won in '96. He had that Electoral College mandate, but he was dealing with a Republican House and Senate. So the interesting question is going to be, how do the Democrats govern with controlling two of the three branches of government, both houses of the legislature and the executive branch? That's going to be an interesting question to watch. Then, of course, you see how is the interaction between the executive and the legislative branch is going to occur, and who is the president-elect going to put in his cabinet and in his sub-cabinet. And that's occurring right now as part of the transition process. And really, you know, we only have a couple months to get this done in the United States, to have this massive change. And the way that works is that there's an office of the president-elect and an office of the presidential transition teams. And every agency puts aside a suite in their offices, and this is done before the election even takes place, so that the incoming administration can come in and can start figuring out what those agencies are doing. And the transition team essentially has two roles. It's one, to educate the incoming team by looking at what is the department's done, what have they done in the past 8 years, what are they working on now, what resources do they have, what proposals are pending, but then also to look at the campaign, to see what the you know, president-elect's platforms had been. How do those work within the existing framework of the agencies, and what would need to change to implement them? Then all of that gets handed off to the new team. Those teams, and this work goes on both sides. The Republicans, the McCain campaign, and the Obama campaign had their transition teams being set up during the election, but of course you don't want to talk about it because it would be presumptive to say, well, I'm going to win, therefore here's who my transition team is going to be. But all of that work is just really getting done now. And that's where we're going to have to, as a business community, want to try and get input into that.
Besides the president, I assume Secretary of State is probably the next big thing to watch for the global community. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's the big three.
Yeah.
The big four were always State, Treasury, Justice, and Defense. And maybe in this day and age, Defense and Treasury are the two biggest, obviously with the U.S. commitments in the Middle East right now, and with everything going on in the financial sector. So, you know, things that are in the newspapers right now to read is you know, Secretary Gates at Defense going to be asked to stay on? Is President-elect Obama going to look to be more bipartisan? And he ran very much on that type of agenda. And is he going to look for somebody like retiring Senator Hagel, a Republican, current Senator Lugar, who people talk as a mentor for Senator Obama, who's a Republican from Indiana? Could he bring them into state? What's going to happen at Treasury? You look at who his advisors have been, and it's been a lot of the Clinton advisors. It was, you know, former Secretaries Rubin and Summers, looking to the New York Fed possibly. So those are the things that people are watching right now, and those will be the first decisions made because of the economic and foreign policy situation we're in.
Certainly during the race, Obama was embraced in Europe. And living in Europe for the last 3 years, and having not such a great relationship with the Bush administration, certainly, what do you see that continuing? I mean, certainly President Sarkozy, Angela Merkel, Gordon Brown, there seemed to be some good rapport. Could you talk about Europe and the United States for a minute?
Well, I mean, Europe, I don't know nearly as well as Asia. I would defer to you more on the European expertise. But I mean, I think that is the honeymoon period that many presidents come in with, and Barack Obama, because of who he is, his life story, the fact that he lived overseas, even adds more to that. So there's a lot of goodwill there. I mean, the question is, how high are the expectations? Are people going to give him the time, and his administration the time to work to meet those?
Well, the concern that I had, quite honestly, seeing the huge crowds, particularly in Germany, was it was really more rock star treatment and not as much substantive issues. And I think the challenge for Obama is to really put some substance early.
Well, and that, and that's the campaign. That is one of the tacks that the McCain campaign took. And now the elections in the U.S. are typically about three things. Historically, going back to World War II and moving to today, you look at three things. The first thing you look at is the economy. How is the economy doing? If the economy is doing well, that helps the incumbent's party. If it's not doing so well, that hurts the incumbent's party. It's what's the president's approval rating. If the higher, the more likely the incumbent party to win. The lower, the more likely the incumbent party to lose. And then the third thing is, how long has the incumbent party been in office? I mean, Americans like change. We don't like seeing the same party in office. And since World War II, only once has one party held the White House for 3 terms. And that was President Reagan's 2 terms and President Bush 41's 1 term. Okay, so where was John McCain? He was, he had the economy. We all know how the economy is doing. The president's approval ratings is in the 20s, about as low as it can be. And this would have been the 3rd term. I mean, he had a terrible situation. In fact, if you look at from those 3 factors, this was the worst situation a Republican has ever run in. I mean, so John McCain did not have it easy. One of the commercials that he ran against Barack Obama was called Celebrity. And it was a picture of Barack Obama, and then they flashed up Paris Hilton, and they flashed up Britney Spears. And that's what he wanted the Americans to think, that this guy, we want to make this election not about the economy, and we can't make this election about President Bush. John McCain wanted to make this election about that Barack Obama wasn't ready to be president. It was style and not substance. And over the course of the campaign and the debates, the way it turned out is clear that the American voters felt that he was substantive and that they were willing to take a chance on him, if not fully support him to be president. We'll see if the Europeans come out with the same conclusion that the American voters did.
Yeah, the mood of the world in terms of optimistic, pessimistic, scared, feeling pretty good about things, obviously right now is scared. 3 days ago, when all the markets went through the roof and there was obviously an anticipation of what was going to happen with President Obama, President-elect Obama, yesterday everything went in the tank again, and it seems like we're either looking for a bottom, or we're looking for leadership, or we're looking for a change in direction. Any insights from your perspective on that?
Well, I think one of the things that we always study after an election are the exit polls. And that's when after people vote, they come out, and then pollsters take a random sampling. They may take 1 out of every 5 people who come out and ask them to fill out a very detailed survey. And one of those questions is, do you believe the country's on the right track, or do you believe it's headed in the wrong direction? And in the U.S., the exit polls were 20% were right direction, and 80% were almost wrong. We were on the wrong track. And that's a very high number. And I think it was one of the New York Times columnists said, I want to meet those 20% of the people who think we're actually going in the right direction. So it's just a tremendous amount of work that needs to get done, and it's not going to change overnight.
Sure. Let me open it up to questions from the group. There are microphones roving around. Is that?
Is this on? Rick Thulman, Corporate Perspectives, and I teach at Columbia and Fletcher, and I've been involved with INSEAD for a long time. I wanted to question you a little bit on your optimism, apparent optimism on trade, because I've been around the trade agenda for a long time in the U.S. I've been a CEO of a major company and been very involved in these issues. And I've never been at a time when there's more reason to be pessimistic about the trade agenda. First of all, NAFTA was the great achievement of the Clinton years, and it happened because Clinton took a politically, I think, very courageous stand to support that, and that allowed the business leadership to come out and take a position. So I guess the odds of Obama early in his term taking a strong position in favor of free trade, having run an election against it, is going to be difficult. And without that presidential moral suasion, I don't know that you'll get the business community to be as aggressive as you'd like. Secondly, the business community has their own problems just surviving now. It's pretty tough to be a CEO these days. And the biggest sector in the U.S. was the financial services sector, which used to be 40% of U.S. S&P profits. And the carnage among CEOs in the CEO sector has been, in the financial sector, has been pretty high. And thirdly, the role of the labor unions in the Democratic policy has gotten much stronger. And the Democrats as a party, and when you talk to individual representatives, they say it's very, very hard for me to, if I want to be reelected to the House, to become a free trader. So I look at all that and I say it's going to be a very, very hard time for the U.S. to take any kind of an aggressive view on free trade. I wish I were wrong, but I don't see it. Would you like to comment on that? I thought you left a more positive impression than I feel.
Before you answer that, somebody was responsible for giving Rick happy pills this morning. You obviously didn't do it. What happened?
In terms of the Clinton administration, absolutely 93, but it included up to 2000 when with the MFN vote or PNTR vote, I guess today we call it now, the PNTR vote for China. So it's throughout the Clinton administration, not just at the beginning. I mean, I think to go back and look at the campaign of the Obama campaign, was it really I don't know if you would call it an anti-trade campaign, is more of I think I've heard the phrase timeout. Let's take a timeout, let's see where we are, let's reassess, and then let's see what we do going forward. I guess I'm not as pessimistic as I've been reading a lot about. I don't know where I would put myself in the optimism, but it's not, I mean, I look at our history for the last 16 years of trade. I look at the people who Obama is looking at for his transition. These are the same, by and large, these are a lot of the people who were in the Clinton administration, and we know the Clinton administration's record. In terms of the labor unions, I don't think the labor unions are stronger today. I think they're very strong, and they've always been very strong. And that's part of the Democratic Party, and that's part of how do you end up doing working with the labor unions to get trade passed.
Just a comment, too, on the financial services industry, Rick. The phenomenon now is that the U.S. government and European governments and Middle East and Asian sovereign wealth funds now own the financial institutions. And so they're in it together. There must be some argument there for a little more cooperation, and hopefully that extends to trade as well.
Hi, good morning. I'm Christoph, also an alumnus. What do you see the options are for President Bush? I mean, in this interim period, is he going to be sabotaging?
He's coming to Asia, right? I assume that's his next job.
Must be, okay. But I mean, we talk about sabotaging the incoming administration, or more cooperating with the handover, push through stuff he doesn't have to suffer the consequences for, or is he going to be focusing on managing his legacy?
In terms of the transition, I mean, from everything I've read and from what I've heard, it's very well established. There's a process in place. I mean, the executive branch, the cabinet departments, they've all cleared out their office space. The transition teams are in. They share everything, and so every transition generally works pretty well. I mean, because we want to have a good handover of the governments. I've been reading that the Obama campaign had been getting the briefings on national security as the McCain campaign did, so that we could have this smooth transition. So I don't think there's any doubt that there's going to be a smooth transition from one administration to the other. I mean, that's the way we do it, and that's the way we should do it, and there's no reason to believe we won't do it that way. Now, what the executive branch will try and do towards the end, I mean, there are certainly going to be issues that are pending and have been pending for a while that we'll try and get done in the last few days. That happened in the Clinton administration, and it's going to happen in the Bush administration. there are not going to be any laws passed that with the Democrats controlling the House and the Senate. I mean, I don't think there's going to be legislation, but it'll be done through the regulatory process. What happened at the end of the Clinton administration was there was a fairly controversial, one example, there's a fairly controversial regulation on ergonomics, and that's from the Department of Labor, and that dictated how workers would have to work, would they have to sit down, how high would their chairs be, how many packages could they lift an hour, how much could the boxes weigh, how much time would they need off, and it was extremely controversial. It got through at the end of the Clinton administration, and then it got immediately taken down when it got to the Congress. So are there regulations out there that may try and get through? That's possible. I mean, I know the aviation side the best. There's the Department of Transportation is very much pushing slot auctions right now, in which landing slots at our busiest airports, Chicago O'Hare and LaGuardia and Kennedy, would be auctioned off. That's very controversial. It won't happen in a Democratic administration. Maybe they'll try and get that done if it's politically possible. Those are the types of things to look for. But in terms of legacy, I mean, you can't change your legacy in 2 months.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more. Lenny?
Leonidas Loss, I'm an alumnus of 1975. You mentioned a lot of old names, having served on previous administrations, and yet President-elect Obama seems to have been elected on the basis of creating something new. Do you think that he will be a president in the mold of President Reagan, who basically delegated to his secretaries of state, secretaries to do the work for them, or do you think he will try to lead from the front?
I don't know if you can answer that until the president actually sits in the Oval Office and he gets into the cabinet meetings. And then there are some presidents who keep things really within the West Wing, and they run the executive branch out of the West Wing. And then there's the model where they rely on their cabinet secretaries much more, and the cabinets have more leeway in implementing the general policy. And it's very hard to know until the person actually sits there and they sit in the cabinet meetings, decide, well, how am I going to do this? I think one of the things to look at is who does he name in the cabinet, and that'll give a good idea of which way he'll want to go. I mean, if you have some very strong personalities who are very independent, that may lead you to think it's going to go one way. If it's more of a team concept, that may lead you to think it's going to be in a different direction. So I mean, that's the kind of things I'll watch for over the next couple months as to who he's going to be, who he'll have in the cabinet. But the people he has heading the transition, I mean, some of the big names you hear, John Podesta, who was the White House Chief of Staff, generally respected by the Democrats and, of course, and the Republicans when he was Chief of Staff, that he could work with the Hill. Tom Daschle, the former Senate Majority Leader, who is seen not as someone more partisan on the Hill. And those are the people who are helping out on the transition. And we'll want to see is those names develop to get that hint.
Great. Steve, thank you so much for sharing your experience and expertise with us.
Thank you. Thank you.